All right, welcome guests. It's Saint Nick, and we are honored today to have Chris Bell on the show. Thank you, Chris, for joining us.
Hey, how's it going, man?
Fantastic. We're very excited to speak to you. Before we start, I think that, our goal was we really wanted to talk a lot about addiction. But before that, maybe I know you have so many, obviously, interviews, and I don't want you to repeat yourself too much, but I wanted to ask briefly for our audience that don't know about you a little bit about your background. I know you have two brothers. One, God rest his soul, passed away. I wanted to know, did you grow up with two parents in your household? And where did you grow up?
Yeah, for anybody that watches Bigger, Stronger, Faster or Prescription Thugs or any of my films, my family's a big part of it. I grew up with a really tight family. My mom and dad were at every sporting event that we ever did. They were very supportive of us all growing up. And I think that's why all of us went on to succeed in whatever we were trying to do. I make films. My younger brother has a company called Slingshot that, he's turned into a multi-million dollar fitness company. And my older brother, before he passed away, his goal was to be a professional wrestler. And although he didn't achieve that goal at the ultimate level that he wanted to, he wrestled for WWE, wrestled a lot of people that everybody knows. And so, he achieved a lot of his goals as well.
Your brother Mike, who passed away, who introduced, I think, John Cena into the WWE, or it's called.
Yeah, he was John Cena's first trainer. And
Oh, that's how it works.
I actually found John Cena came to California to visit a friend of his, and that friend just happened to work at the same place that I worked, and I met John, and basically we hounded him for months and months to be a wrestler, but he wanted to be a bodybuilder, and so he entered a couple of bodybuilding shows, and his proportions were just so crazy. His arms were so big compared to his chest and all these other things, so he didn't do that great in bodybuilding. And finally, we were able to convince him to go to wrestling school and become a wrestler. So we had a big part in it. But once he got into wrestling school, I've never seen anybody work harder. So all the credit goes to him. I mean, we just kind of pointed him in the right direction. I used to write for this wrestling league. So I used to write all of his promos originally. And then my younger brother was in the same league and would wrestle against him while my older brother trained him. So we all kind of had a part in it.
It's so cool. Did Ed Connors have anything to do with it at all?
Ed Connors had a lot to do with it. Ed Connors was on our side pushing him. He's like, he's Ed Connors and I had the same idea. Like Ed was pushing to be a wrestler as well. Ed's done a lot of great things for a lot of people.
Yeah. I mean, it helped me. I mean, that's how I met you. I mean, that's how it all started. So
yeah,
it's so much history there with Ed. It's crazy, especially with wrestling too. It's nuts.
I think he's had 750 house guests or something like that when he lived
he showed me his notebook one time with everyone signs the book when you go to stay at his house, and he has all the craziest people in that book. Like everyone's favorite bodybuilder was in that book at one point.
Yeah.
What were you three brothers like in high school? Were you athletic in high school, all three of you?
So my oldest brother was really athletic. He was actually the only person in our high school to go play Division I football. He played at University of Cincinnati. They were terrible at the time. This year, they're one of the best teams in the country. But at the time, they were terrible. But he was the only athlete in our whole school to play Division I football. I was always a lot shorter than him. So I played football, but I wasn't really any good at football. But the whole time I was playing football, when I was like 16 years old, I started to have severe knee pain. So I had a knee surgery like really young at 16. Oh. And when I went to, I was trying to get like physical therapy or try to figure out how to fix it. And I went to this chiropractor who told me to squat. He was a power lifter. And so at like 16 years old, I learned how to squat. And by the time I was 18, I was a power lifter crushing like national records in powerlifting competitions. And so I was really good at powerlifting, but I wasn't really good at other sports. And then my younger brother, Mark, he got into powerlifting basically because of me. And now that's all he does. So, I think it's interesting. Like we were all into lifting at a young age because my oldest brother, Mad Dog, he loved to lift. And that was a big part of, I remember seeing him squat 500 pounds when he was in like 10th grade. And I was like, holy shit, that's a lot of weight, And so I always wanted to do that. And I sort of followed in his footsteps and started squatting really heavy and deadlifting really heavy and benching really heavy, like all through high school. I benched like 425, I think, by the time I graduated high school.
Wow.
That was obviously natural and obviously, without equipment. So
You were good at all three lifts naturally in high school?
yeah, I was
Oh, wow.
pretty good at all three lifts. I mean, I have a lot of chronic pain that developed over the years of things. I have like the same genetic issues that my dad has, bad hips. I had a double hip replacement surgery at 35 years old. So a lot of people think I got banged up from powerlifting, but I actually powerlifted when I was really young. And then I was in severe chronic pain for so many years. And actually I got in more pain when I stopped lifting. So now I squat and deadlift every week. Like I still, like just last week, I did a trap bar deadlift with 600 pounds. So I haven't slowed down really. Like I'm stronger than I was in high school almost right now. I think the reason that everything got messed up is because I stopped lifting. Like I was told like, oh, if everything hurts, then stop lifting. And so I did. I stopped moving. And when I stopped moving after a couple of years, everything was so bound up that I needed surgery.
What were you squatting in like 11th grade?
I don't know in like 11th grade, but I entered the teenage nationals. I had like a 600-pound squat, like around 19 years old, somewhere around there. I'm only like 200 pounds. I'm not like a huge guy. So I was in a 198 weight class usually. And I think I've in a competition, I think the most I've done was 675, I believe, but I've never gone over 700 in a competition.
Incredible.
And it was a goal, but I never got there.
Did you guys grow up in Ohio then?
Upstate New York, in Poughkeepsie, New York. Yeah.
But I was just asking because I know your brother trained at Westside Barbell, and then you mentioned that Mad Dog was also in Ohio as well. So I was curious.
Yeah. Yep.
You used to have drawn both of you, two of your brothers there. After high school, you went to the premier filmmaking school, I suppose, which is USC.
Yeah, that was kind of a fluke. So I was, my dad had told me when I was getting out of high school, he said, well, you don't really have good grades and I barely passed high school because I just like to screw around a lot. And he said, you don't have good grades. You should go to the city and get a job, like to the town, and get a job as like a garbage man or a postal worker or something like that. And that scared me to death. He's like, you can do that, or you can go to community college. And so I went to this community college, and long story short, I made a music video for my friends that were, they lived in upstate New York in Poughkeepsie, where I was from, but they performed a lot in New York City. They were like rappers, hip hop, artists. I made a music video for them, and it won a national contest. And by winning that national contest, that brought me out to California for the very first time. When I came to California for the first time, I met this woman who was running this national contest. And she said, oh, you're so talented. And she's like, that this contest was judged by Francis Ford Coppola and all these other famous people, right?
Jeez.
And I was like, no, I didn't really know that. And she's like, yeah. She's like, you should go to USC Film School. And I had never even heard of USC Film School. The only thing I knew about USC was that O.J. Simpson went there. And this is actually before he killed anybody. So this was like 1991. So I actually applied to USC. And then the year that I got into USC, like when I was going to USC for the first year, I was actually home for some sort of holiday I remember when the Bronco was being chased, because everybody's like, you go to school there, right? And I'm like, that's your school. I'm like, no. Yeah. But yeah, that happened like that year. So the year I went to USC, I think it was like 92 or 93, around that. And I ended up going to USC, for film production. And originally, like the way that it works is,
no, USC is a very prestigious school, but that's their best department. So this is,
yeah, it was cool. It was like, I didn't really feel like I belonged there. I was like total meathead, and I was in this program, like nobody lifted in my program. There was nobody that worked out or anything. So I was definitely, an outcast in that system, but also like, I think that's an advantage because I also knew everybody, so I also bounced at the school bar. And so I just knew everybody at USC. Like when I went there, I was friends with everybody, and it actually got me into a lot of places and, got me a lot of things throughout life, Yeah.
I almost went to USC, actually. I was accepted to the business school.
Really?
Yeah. And one of my coaching clients is starting at Marshall soon. It's a really wonderful school. But the thing about USC is it's very expensive. Did you have a scholarship kind?
I had a lot of some scholarship money, and like when I went there, and some grants and some things like that that helped me, get through there. My father worked for IBM at the time, and
Oh wow.
IBM was huge. They were gigantic, and he was doing really well, making a lot of money. But then, like, there was I forget like what year it was. Like in the '90s, there was like a massive recession hit, and it hit IBM, and they had to downsize, and so they fired like 10,000 people. And my dad was one of those people that after 20 years got let go, and he got let go right before I went to USC. So it actually worked out perfect because my dad had zero income. So when I went to apply for financial aid, they gave me every bit of financial aid that I actually got.
Wow.
So when my dad got fired, I remember my mom was crying about it. And then I remember my dad saying, well, don't cry too hard because this is going to really help Chris. And that's how my dad's always been. He's always been supportive like that,
Wow.
Incredible family. That's a beautiful
Yeah.
school. After USC, did you get directly into filmmaking, or because I've heard you
No, it took
bouncer and
it took forever. I mean, it's funny because my dad has always told me, just when you think that you're where you want to be, you're probably 10 years away. And I thought I was going to graduate college and just, go out and make it. And there I was bouncing at Sharky's in Hermosa Beach. And,
Sharky's.
and Sharky's is like a famous bar, like everybody knows it.
That's
And
hilarious.
and I actually worked there with John Cena too. Like he was one of the bouncers with my brother Mark and I.
That's
My
crazy.
brother Mark met his wife there, so and they're still married.
Wow.
So yeah, so I had a friend that I went to USC with that owned this bar, Sharky. So I had a lucky job because I made good money there, and I ran security there for like 5 or 6 years after school. So I had like jobs where I could make people would say, oh, why didn't you go get like a film job? And I'm like, well, I don't really fit in an office. So for me, I would rather have like life experience. So I bounced at the most famous bar in Southern California for like 5 or 6 years, and made good money rather than to take a job in the film industry where I'm making copies for somebody, because that's all people do.
Yeah.
And so and through that experience of like bouncing at a bar, that gave me the money and the power to be able to go to Gold's Gym every day during the day, so I didn't have anything that I had anywhere I had to be during the day. I only worked at night. So I'd go to Gold's and hang out all day. And that's what Bigger, Stronger, Faster ended up being. If I never went to Gold's all day, every day, I would have never made that movie. I would have never been that into it and had the drive to sort of make that,
You were driving from
Networking.
Hermosa to Venice every day?
What's up?
You were driving from Hermosa Beach to Venice every day?
I lived in, I usually lived in for the most part, I lived in Santa Monica and Venice. And I usually would just drive to Hermosa for work. And then for a little while, I lived in like Redondo Beach, but not for too long. Mainly I lived in like the Venice area, I've always lived pretty close to Gold's, and I was there for a good 20 something years. And it's kind of sad now that it's gone, for a long time. It's been out of commission.
Do you still live
go ahead. No, I was just going to say, are they opening soon? Is there any word on that? What's going on?
I think they're opening up soon. I saw Mike O'Hearn post something about it. I know they let Mike go back in there to do some filming, but I think they're opening up pretty soon.
Are they going to be okay, you think, with this whole hit, or are they going to be?
Yeah, I mean, they're a huge company. I think they probably got some, some of that protection money or something like that. But
right.
I think they'll be okay. But I think maybe a lot of their franchises will close down. Like, a lot of these gyms are not able to handle it, and it just sucks. It's like really unfortunate.
Real quick question. It's a little off topic, but not really. But when you're telling this story, it reminds me a lot about myself as well, like being in the right place at the right time. And so I contribute to some of it, like being hard work, and some of it luck. Do you think a lot of it has to do with just your perseverance to like just be relentless at what you wanted? Or do you think a lot has to do with luck as well, like being in the right place, meeting these people, networking? Like which one do you contribute to it more? Or you think it's just like a 50-50 split between everything?
Yeah, it's weird. It's like you can't predict it and you can't really make it happen. It's just I would just continue to keep trying, and the thing is, it's like a lot of people get knocked down and they just stop trying it, or when I went to USC film school, for example, everybody told me, well, I went to a community college first.
Right.
I was at this community college and I told people I was going to apply to USC, and every single person laughed at me. It's like, they're like, you're never going to get in there. You don't have the grades for that. You don't have, you didn't do this, you didn't do that. And I'm like, well, these people told me to apply because I made this film, and I got right in. And so, it's like, I think our anxiety and our fear 99% of the time is over things that aren't, ever going to even happen to us. And so we worry about it so much and it doesn't happen, and so, it's a little bit of luck. I mean, I think they say the harder you work, the luckier you get. Right. Yeah. So I think that if, for example, if you're a bodybuilder, like my brother wanted to be a pro wrestler, right? My older brother. And the reason why he probably never made it is because he never looked like a bodybuilder. Like all the good pro wrestlers back in the day, and in his time when he was coming up, they were super jacked. They looked awesome. And Mad Dog kind of like, he just looked okay,
Right.
Like he was a big dude, but he just looked like a big dude. He looked like a big football player.
Yeah,
and he wasn't ripped.
Yeah.
But if he was like ripped, they probably, if he looked like John Cena, like when they saw John Cena, why do you think they took him? Because he looked perfect at the time. Yeah. And even my younger brother, my younger brother was ripped, but I remember he weighed like 205 pounds and he was shredded. And it was like him and John Cena are almost the same height, but they were going, for WWE at the same time. And WWE immediately picked John, and they took a really long time to bring my brother Mark in. And when they brought him in, they didn't bring him in like John. They didn't like sign him right away. It was a different process. Yeah. It was under a much slower process. But if Mark was as big as John, then he would have got picked up a lot quicker. So it's like, it is a lot of luck, but it is like how hard you work too,
Because most people wouldn't have never taken a bouncing job like you. Like I bounced a lot in my life too. And I felt like that job was like, it made, when I look over the years of people, the contacts I made at those jobs, it was incredible as a bouncer. But most people are so scared of the job title. Like, oh, I'm a bouncer. Like I can't.
It sounds kind of stupid, like
right.
It's like you're like a meathead or something. But
yeah, right.
At our place, it was fun, and I had a lot of fun. And then, like I said, it allowed me to do other stuff during the day. So I used to like write during the day, and I was trying to do other film. Originally, like I never wanted to make documentaries. I got like roped into making documentaries. So I have a bunch of screenplays that I wrote and different things that some of them I still want to do. They just never happened yet, So, but it gave me time to write and to do other things and to work on other projects and to go lift at the Mecca every day and be part of that.
Yeah.
I've heard you mention that in interviews before, that you sent your screenplays to, studios and didn't get responses. But I have to say, I think that you may have influenced the world in a good way, much more than many film directors, to be honest.
Yeah, well, that's something I take pride in, is the fact that, it's like if life sends you one way, it's like, then just go with it. That's what I did. I just was like, okay, I didn't really want to make documentaries. I didn't even want to be in Bigger, Stronger, Faster. So like I had written this whole sort of expose about steroids and the American dream, and how my whole opinion in the beginning was like, steroids are the most American thing that there is, because everybody wants to win in this country. Like I was thinking it was very hypocritical the way that we were looking at it. So I'd written this whole expose on steroids, and then I was talking to my producers, and I said, it's really interesting because it was at the time, I'm like, my younger brother's on steroids, and he's like, he's all for it, and he seems to be doing really well. And my older brother's on steroids, and he doesn't seem to be doing very well, and I'm like, and my producers are like, what? Your brothers are on steroids? And I was like, yeah, that's why I want to make this movie.
Oh boy.
And they're like, why aren't we filming that? And I'm like, I didn't think it was interesting. And they're like, that's the most interesting thing you've ever said. And that became like a big part of the movie, was my whole family. And I didn't really intend it to be that way,
Yeah.
Can I ask you briefly, before we leave the topic of Bigger, Stronger, Faster and steroids, your opinion? I didn't know, by the way, that you were not on steroids yourself. And I know that now you have low test levels, you've said in interviews, but what's your opinion in general on two things? Number one, the the societal discrimination. I mean, marijuana is legal. A lot of things are legal. Alcohol, very dangerous drug, is legal. But like in Sweden, the police will pull you over if you're a muscular guy, and in liberal societies, it seems to be they don't like the idea of a very masculine, androgenic man. And that's one thing. The second thing I want to ask you about is your opinion on the health effects of steroids.
Yeah, it's one thing that is interesting. Like in Sweden, they'll pull you over. I don't know, like why people are afraid of people that are big and muscular. I think they're scared of them. But the more people I meet that are bigger and muscular, they're usually really nice. They're usually like the nicer people that I know because they're not scared of anything. And also, like, we're always worried that, like, if you bang into somebody, you're like going to knock them over. And the big guy's always like, whoa, I'm so sorry. Like, that's the one that's always so sorry. It's always like the little person that knocks into you. They don't say anything, And so, I don't know why that stigma exists. But what was your other question?
My other question was your overall opinion on the health effects of steroids.
Oh, health. I think Nick would probably agree with this. I'm not sure, but I think that steroids are totally fine when people use them in normal amounts. But the amount of times that we see people use them in normal amounts is pretty small. So, when I did Bigger, Stronger, Faster, like looking back on it, that's one of the things I would like to go into a little bit more is like steroids aren't going to, they're probably not going to kill you, but they could contribute to an earlier death if you're not taking care of yourself and you're abusing them and all these other things. Like, you said you were 60 pounds bigger. I don't know if you did them or not, but it sounds like maybe you did. So, you probably know as well, like you probably feel healthier being smaller. I mean, the bigger problem with steroids is just the fact that you gain weight, right? And we know as far as biohacking longevity goes, that gaining weight is not really a great thing. Gaining some muscle is a great thing. So say steroids help you put on like 5 pounds of muscle. If it's only helping you put on 5 pounds of muscle, you're probably taking them in a healthy way, but if it's helping you put on like 40 pounds of muscle, now you're carrying around this big frame and your body has to create energy for all that. So I just think that, as far as longevity goes, the smaller you are, kind of the better off you are. Giant people, we don't see people that are 6'10" live to be 80 years old. Like that just doesn't happen. There's something about being big and whatever. People don't seem to live as long. And I think even in mouse studies, like the smaller they are, the longer they live and stuff like that. So absolutely. I think expending less energy and, keeping your body at a normal size. So I would advise that people that want to use steroids, just use them in a, like a therapeutic way, like I'm 48 years old now. So using some testosterone here and there is like not to me a crazy thing, but using a lot of testosterone just doesn't make any sense. It's like, and also I'm not competing in anything. So why? If I was competing, then like, yeah, maybe it'd be worth it to use it and even maybe abuse it. But it's like abusing it for short terms is different than abusing it all the time. And I think a lot of people get addicted to it mentally. So there is no like addiction physically to it, but you can get addicted to it where you feel like you have to have it. And once you go off, you feel so depressed that, you need to go back on it. And I think those things are dangerous. And those are the things that people need to watch out for with steroids. But I think for normal use, I don't think there's any problem with it.
One of the things we focus on this channel is harm reduction with steroids, because, there are certain things that happen with steroids. For example, usually the most well-known thing, which I've been trying to popularize, is blood pressure issues. Of course, when your blood pressure is high, your heart has to beat harder because the vessels are narrower. Yeah. And your kidneys also suffer, and you develop something called glomerular sclerosis, which is very common among bodybuilders, which is scarring of the kidneys. So some things like beta blockers, which block some of the adrenergic adrenaline from like trenbolone or something like that, and then blood pressure medications. And then, for example, even in the brain, one of the effects of steroids in the long-term use in all human studies is a downregulation of serotonin receptors, which is a lot of the time, I think, why people, when they go off steroids, they don't feel a sense of peace inside themselves. But moving on from this, there's another theme of your life I've noticed, which is so you already mentioned your knee issue, and later you had a double hip replacement, and then you had another hip replacement, and we'll get into the pain, of course, afterwards. But first, I wanted to ask, how did you get into the ketogenic diet and then the carnivore diet?
Yeah, that's interesting. So actually, I talked about the carnivore diet on Joe Rogan's podcast in 2017, before anybody had ever talked about it. I went to Gold's Gym when I was, I think, 18 years old. And I walked in and I was like, where are the power lifters? You know, and they pointed me in the direction of the power lifters. And I look over and there's some guy wearing these striped clown pants, and it's Michael Hearn. I didn't know him at the time. He's become one of our really good friends over the years. So it's Mr. Natural over there in the corner. And I go over and I go talk to him and tell him I'm a power lifter. He's like, oh, you got to jump in with us and blah, blah, blah. So he's training with this other guy, Ron, and his name's Ron Fedko. This other guy, Ron, is like this short, jacked maniac, and he's squatting like 700 pounds or something. And I started lifting with these guys for, a couple weeks. And they said to me, you're a pretty good power lifter, but you're just too fat. Because I was about 200. I'm only like 5'7".
This your first day you met them?
Yeah, like third, fourth day, maybe.
Did you get pissed, or were you like, you brushed it off?
Well, no, they were like really just blunt, just like honest. Like, they're like, you're really good, but you're just too fat. They're like, if you were like 200 pounds, you'd be awesome. And I'm like, but I don't know anything about like nutrition or diet. And Ron just looks at me and goes, red meat and water. And that's what he said to me. And so he just basically, I'm like, what? He's like, I want you to eat red meat and water, nothing but that, for like the next couple months. I'm like, months? And he's like, yeah. And so I'm a stupid kid, so I just do it. And the next thing you know, 3 months later, I am 196 pounds down from 242. So it was like, holy shit. And I didn't lose any strength. I felt awesome. I wasn't on anything at the time. I was still, pretty young.
And you were strict to the diet? You were strict to the diet?
Yeah, I was strict to the diet. And also I would he would let me cheat like once a week, so like it was actually pretty easy. So I eat like red meat. And then on like the last day, I would be able to eat like one meal of whatever I wanted. And then I could eat fruit during that day or whatever. And so then I go right back on it. And I did that for like kind of like a while. And then when like a powerlifting meet would come around, sometimes I'd be like a little heavy. I'd be over the weight class. So say I'd be like 210, and then I would just do red meat and water for like a week, and I would get my weight down and keep my strength up. So I had known about this for a real long time, but then I was in Gold's Gym. So after addiction and all these other things had happened to me, I'd gotten out of shape and pretty fat, and if you look at the difference between, bigger, stronger, faster, I wasn't in the best shape, but I was about 200 pounds then. And then in Prescription Thugs, I'm about 240 pounds. And I was real fat in Prescription Thugs. It was actually like embarrassing. And I started losing some weight after I did Prescription Thugs. But I was at the gym one day at Gold's, and a friend of my training partner, Brent, he came up to me and he said, hey, I don't know if you heard Joe Rogan, but there was this idiot on there talking about eating just red meat. And I'm like, wait a second, what do you mean idiot? I'm like, I used to do that. And he's like, you used to eat just red meat? I'm like, yeah. And he's like, there's this guy's like a doctor or something. He's on there. He's talking about eating red meat. So I go home and listen to it immediately. Yes. And it's Dr. Sean Baker.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm listening to it. I'm like, well, this guy's not an idiot at all. Like everything this guy's saying is sort of making sense to me. And I also had a lot of all these autoimmune issues, like I had to get fake hips because my cartilage wore away. The reason I got fake hips was because my cartilage wore away at 35 years old. I had no cartilage in either one of my hips or in my lower back or in my knees. So, I needed my knees replaced too.
Well, I just want to stop you there. Did you have any other autoimmune issues, or was just arthritis? I'm just curious.
Mainly arthritis,
for example. Oh, okay.
Mainly arthritis, but also some gut issues and some other things.
Okay.
So as soon as I heard Sean Baker on there, I decided to basically I called him, like I tweeted to him, he was pretty easy to get in touch with. He seemed bigger, stronger, faster and stuff. That's an advantage I always seem to have, is like, if I hit people up, they kind of know, they already know who I am. That's like a big advantage.
Yeah.
So I got in touch with him. I got him to come up to my brother's gym up here in Sacramento, Super Training Gym. And we talked to him. And as soon as I talked to him, he's like, you should try this. It might really help you with pain. And because I had gotten over addiction. I had gotten over my addiction to pills from my hip surgery and all that, but I was still in a lot of pain. And so I did this carnivore diet, which is just an all meat, red meat and water diet. And I did it pretty strict for like 3-4 months. And I was coming off of a ketogenic diet. I had gotten had become real popular again. And I had done keto before. So I was on a keto diet because I just sort of stumbled into that again. And then when I hit the carnivore diet, though, about 3 years ago, everything just started changing. Like, I had never had abs in my life. I'd never known how to get there. I just never knew. I mean, I knew that bodybuilders dieted, but I didn't know how hard it was. And then until you try it, you don't know how hard it is, to get ripped. And, but on carnivore, I just kept eating meat. And the more meat I would eat, I would just keep getting more and more ripped. So I'd even have bodybuilders who have done it a million times hitting me up going like, dude, that seems like an easy, they're like, you're eating as much meat as you can. I'm like, yeah, well, not as much as I can, but as much as I want, Right. So I just eat till I'm full. And so I had people who have dieted for centuries, for bodybuilding shows calling me up going, what are you doing? And I'm like, I'm just eating meat. And they're like, really? Because like, I kind of want to do that because there's something about the freedom of it that's really nice. Like, you can do, if you just keep eating meat and you keep getting leaner to a certain point. But the problem is it's not sustainable for like long periods of time. And that's why I don't recommend like everybody does it. I don't recommend it for everybody all the time. I like it. I like what it does for me. So I use it, I think that every diet is a tool. So to me, it's a tool that I'll use. Like, for example, for the past like week, I've been on it really strict. But before that, for about maybe like a month, I was just kind of, I do prioritize protein and eat a certain way. But for like a couple of weeks, I was just kind of eating whatever I wanted, up through the holidays. Yeah. And I think that that's okay once in a while. I think that as long as you're mainly healthy and mainly eating good, that you can kind of go in and out of these diets. And I think to be dogmatic about any diet is just really stupid. Like, so yesterday I made chili, and it would be stupid for me to have to put like some vegetables in the chili just because, it's got to be meat. It's like, well, it doesn't, understand why it's got to be mostly meat, but it doesn't have to be all meat all the time, but I found, ways around that help you keep it fun. Because if you don't keep it fun, it's definitely not sustainable.
Yeah. Are you monitoring your C-reactive protein and fibrinogen throughout this time to see if it was, do you do that? That's what I do, for example, to see.
I've done it. So I've done it a lot in the first like year that I did this diet. So I'm on like the third year now, or fourth year now, maybe, of doing this. So like the first year that I did it though, I got my blood work done like 5 times. And every time, like my cholesterol, like my LDL was a little high, but my triglycerides were always low. And to me, that seemed pretty normal. And then, C-reactive protein, like I didn't have a problem with anything, everything seemed to be okay every time I got my blood checked. So I actually stopped checking my blood. Like I don't check it anymore because like every time I do it, it's $400. And so I'm like, I feel great. Do I need to go get my blood work done? And if I feel shitty, I think I'll go get my blood work done.
Exactly. Because people like us, you can tell them. For me, if I eat some grains or if I eat a pizza, my shoulder will start hurting the next day. So I know that I don't need to go get a test. Really, I know that the inflammation is back, the immune system is attacking my body. Or I'll notice.
I would say this. I noticed that. For me, like the carnivore diet doesn't 100% knock out pain, right? Like it doesn't totally kill the pain in your body because I've had to do some other things to get rid of pain that were like above and beyond the Call of Duty. I use psychedelics a lot for pain issues, and that works really well. And we can talk about that as well. But the thing is that the carnivore diet won't knock out all your pain, but it'll get rid of like a lot of that sort of achy, chronic pain, for enough time for you to be able to do stuff. I noticed that also for me, it takes like 3 or 4 days of eating bad for me to feel it, and so it might not even take 3 or 4 days of eating bad for me to feel it. It may be like there's a little bit of a delay. It's not like, oh, I'll eat this and the next day something hurts. I'll eat something and then like 3 days later something will hurt, and I'll realize, oh, it's probably what I ate, but yeah, it's if you have those kind of issues, I think trying these kind of diets is a pretty smart thing to do, just to see if it works. And if it doesn't work, you abandon it and go to something else. I think people are too uptight about like what diet to do, and people fight over it and everything. And I think it's kind of funny.
Yeah, that unfortunately the diet camps attract, I think, people with like not pathological, but a little bit of psychological issues. So they're very religious about their camp, and then they argue with the other camp. And
the hard part is, it's like, yeah, like I'm really supportive of carnivore diet because it's really done a lot for me. And so I try to help people use it. And so I post a lot about it on Instagram, but in no means do I want to be part of it. You know what I mean? Like I try to tell people like, I'm not part of this. So I rarely like hashtag things. The only reason I do hashtag things is because I'm trying to help people. And so my brother and I think we've helped hundreds of people lose hundreds of pounds. The guys that come to us are usually fat power lifters, and usually they get into powerlifting because they're overweight, and they're kind of drawn to that, right? But what are fat guys drawn to too? Bacon and eggs. They love that shit. And so for us, like we've said that we're like, hey, if you're a big guy, you're going to enjoy steak, you're going to enjoy ribs, you're going to enjoy bacon, you're going to enjoy eggs. So we're just going to get rid of all the other crap. And most guys say I could do that because it's a very manly diet, right? Like I'm not pitching this to women, even though women have great results on it because they have a lot more autoimmune issues that this seems to fix, but they don't like to listen to an all meat diet. But a lot of guys will listen to it. So it's like Stan Efferding always says the best diet's the one that you'll do, because compliance is the science. If you can get people to comply to something. So it's pretty easy to get people to commit and to comply to a carnivore diet, especially if it's only like, hey, we're going to do a 30-day challenge. And then a 30-day challenge is always the best way to get somebody locked into something long-term. So if somebody can do a 30-day challenge and they lose, 20 pounds or something, and they feel great, then we can get them to continue on some sort of plan, even if it's not that same plan. They already have made better habits, and now we can give them some other sort of plan to follow,
So you're addressing obesity, which obviously will shorten someone's life. So if someone is very obese, obviously the carnivore diet, if it helps them lose weight, will probably extend their life. The concerns, of course, with health with the carnivore diet are twofold. The first fold is that mTOR is turned on because these amino acids in the proteins turn on our growth pathways in the body. Like you said, bigger people usually don't live that long. Even if you're not that big, if that growth pathway is always on, we have nutrient sensing pathways. David Sinclair always talks about this on Joe Rogan's show, which is the AMP kinase pathway. If your body always senses that you're going to grow in adulthood, but not after the age of 60. After the age of 60, it's actually good for you. But in adulthood, it may make your life a bit shorter. But there's another thing, which I think that sometimes the carnivore people, they have an opinion, which is that if your triglycerides are low, you will not develop plaque in your arteries or if you develop plaque, you will not end up with cardiovascular disease. I always feel like, why risk it? We have some fantastic new drugs, like, for example, PCSK9 inhibitors, which are now, unfortunately, you can't get it prescribed by a doctor unless you have what's called familial hypercholesterolemia, meaning your total cholesterol is over 300. But you can pay for it if you have money, $5,000 a year. It's called Repatha. Unlike statins, doesn't cause muscle weakness and doesn't cause an increase in calcium buildup in the arteries. And you can just lower your LDL cholesterol and continue eating your meats. That way you don't come across that risk. But unfortunately, I think people don't want to use these things in combination because they're scared sometimes of drugs.
I think that people need to open their mind to, like, not everything that's natural is always the best. That's why we have inventions. Like your iPhone's not natural. Like there's so many things that people will just skip over the logic of their own logic. And just because something's not, like example, like I've never heard that before. I'm like, oh, that sounds like a good idea. You know what else sounds like a good idea? I've talked to a couple of nutritional experts that have told me, a better idea than carnivore would be like you could eat if you eat leaner meats, right? Like, so I use a meat called Piedmontese. It's a beef, but it's Piedmontese. So it's a different breed. And the breed is a lower fat breed, right? So it's literally the steaks have half the fat of other cows. And so if I eat those steaks and it only has 4 grams of fat, that's a better version of the carnivore diet, to eat that and have like a little salad with olive oil on it, because you're getting fats, like you're getting better fats with the high protein, right? So there are better ways to do things. It doesn't always have to be, well, no, just eat the fatty red meat all the time. Like, I don't believe in that either. And that's why I believe in like cycling these diets and like going from carnivore to keto to like, I've even done like Lane Norton's kind of macro diet, like right before that, where it's just following sort of like a macro and calorie, restricted diet to just try to see if that works for me. And that did work for me really well, but I got sick of tracking things. I like to just kind of eat when I want to eat. And so that's why carnivore seems to work really well for me, but it might not work for other people, because other people might love potatoes or love, a lot of people think they don't get any fuel, which I always laugh at, because I can always train like a maniac. No matter what, I always have energy,
Yeah, I could second that. I lost like 115 pounds doing the keto and carnivore diet. So and a lot of it has full, right? a lot has to do with you, because you consistently were in my mind posting about it. And then like I did more research on it, and I was like, you know what? I was having a lot of glucose issues at the time too, because I was overweight. I was 350. And that was my post bodybuilding depression era. But I was like, I gotta get this weight off. And there was no way I was getting it off by weight training and having carbs in my diet. I realized those two things are just enemies to me. So I was like, you know what? Like, I don't even like eating carbs. I like eating protein. So I'm like, I'm just gonna go down this road, see what happens. And literally like 7 months later, I dropped 110 pounds. So and unlimited energy. Like, I can't even sleep sometimes because I have too much energy, and I've never felt that way in my life.
And I don't think carbs are bad by any means. Obviously, like every single bodybuilder that's ever won anything has used them. Everybody's used them, right? So it's like, it's not like they're a bad thing, but carbs beget carbs, right? Especially in guys like us, and especially if you're overweight at the time. If you eat one cookie, you're going to eat 100 of them. That's just the way it is. But if you eat no cookies, then you'll eat no cookies. Like, that's the bottom line, is like, it does come down to calories. A lot of this does all end up in, as much as I hate to say it, it ends up being, your calories in, calories out, because that's not a perfect system. But bottom line is, like, if you eat less, you're going to lose weight. And if you eat more, you're going to gain weight. I mean, it's just the bottom line.
You don't get hungry, right? Like, cause
that's what I'm saying. And so a carnivore diet's just an easier way to not get hungry, and in turn eat less food. So I know a lot of people will say, well, I was eating 6,000 calories a day of meat on a carnivore diet. And I'd say, well, I don't believe you, because I think you can do that for a couple of days where you can eat really high calorie. But then after like the third day, and I've done this because I've experimented with it. After the third day of eating like 400 grams of protein, the next day you'll eat like 50 grams of protein, because you just can't even, even stomach it after a while.
You're not digested yet either.
And so that's what the food does. It like catches up to you.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the most exciting part, I think, of this discussion for me, which is your history with opioid addiction as well as alcoholism, which I by the way, I tried to research you a lot, but I don't really understand how the alcoholism fit into it. I know your elder brother, Mad Dog.
That's actually pretty, it's pretty simple. It's like I was, so my older brother, Mad Dog, he was always kind of into like drugs and alcohol, and he passed away at 37 years old in a sober living facility. And we don't really know why. It was just ruled an accident. They think he may have been huffing something that killed him.
They huff in all those sober livings. It's incredible.
Yeah. There's a bunch of shit that goes on. Yeah. So I don't know if that was the case or whatever. Never really conclusive. But after he died, I also saw that and was like, I'm never going to, like, I had already had my hip surgery and I was already addicted to pills. So I had a double hip replacement surgery at 35 because of genetic arthritis. And after I had that, I shortly after, it never healed right. So I got addicted to pills. Well, I went back to my doctor several times, and my doctor never said anything was wrong. But I kept telling my doctor I was in pain, and he was saying, well, that's impossible. So my doctor never believed me. So the fact that he kept saying that's impossible, he cut me off of pills. So when he cut me off of pills, I had to find them on my own. And then that's when things got way worse, is because I still needed them and I was hooked on them. And so I found ways to get them and get lots of them, at a time. And I became like really addicted to them, taking like 20, 30 Percocets a day and stuff like that, getting in these high numbers. And I have friends that have taken double and triple of that, which is really crazy. But yeah, it just kind of with a snowball effect. And then, finally I was at a point where I'm like, I need to get off of opioids. And I was able to get off of opioids using Suboxone, but it was really hard. I mean, I used Suboxone. Like my doctor had me on Suboxone for like 8 months, and you're only supposed to be on it for like a couple weeks. So I was on it for like way too long. And then I was trying to get off Suboxone because it was just real embarrassing to be on that all the time. Like I had to always have it. And like, I was just,
how many milligrams of Suboxone were you doing at the time? Do you remember?
Well, I started with the big ones. Like,
do you have the pills or the strips?
The pills. Oh, okay. I started with those big, like 8 milligram pills, and then huge. I'd end up breaking them up and everything. Finally, I ended up with like to the point where I'd just be at like a little crumb, and then I would take the little crumb, and a couple hours later, I'd be crawling around on the floor, seeing if I dropped any other crumbs, because I was like, I'm like in my 40s, just crawling around on the floor looking for a little tiny piece of a pill. And I'm like, what a loser I am, and that's what you get to.
For the audience that doesn't understand what Suboxone is, so Suboxone is a mixture of Subutex and naltrexone or something like that. They add the other part just so you can inject it. But the Subutex part is a partial agonist of the MUA opioid receptor and an antagonist of the kappa and delta. It's actually also an agonist of the epsilon opioid receptor. But basically what it does is block 2 of them, partially agonize one of them, and it has a very strong affinity. So usually doctors will give a patient this for about 2 weeks and quickly wean them off it. But if you stay on it for a long time, the withdrawal can be really severe.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's, getting off of Suboxone was the hardest thing I ever did. I basically ended up in the emergency room twice trying to get off of Suboxone. And all they do for that is give you like Xanax to get off of Suboxone. So it's like one drug after another. And so then I got addicted to, after I was off of all the opioids, I was still drinking every day. I had been drinking every day before that. So once I learned that you could drink with opioids and that would be better, then I started doing that every day. So I would have a couple drinks and take opioids. So then I went from drinking and taking opioids to just drinking. And then because I was just drinking, that got worse. And so that just turned me into an alcoholic. And so for a long time after that, I wasn't on opioids, but I was drinking every day.
Were you still in pain all the time when you were drinking?
What's that?
When you were drinking, were you in pain all the time still?
Yeah, that's sort of why is like I never got out of pain, so that's why I kept drinking. And finally, it got to a point where the drinking got so bad that I was drinking and I was taking benzos like Xanax to recover from the hangovers, right? So then I kind of got addicted to those pills. And so in Prescription Thugs, when I get addicted to pills, the second time it was basically benzos. It wasn't opioids again. And so it was kind of like a little too confusing to put in the movie. So I just sort of said, hey, I relapsed, But basically I got addicted to benzo.
For the audience to know, opiates have one of the worst withdrawals, and benzos can kill you with the withdrawals. And same with alcohol.
You get seizures from them, yeah.
Seizures, and you can die easily,
So finally I got to a point where everything kind of came crashing down, and you have no money left and you have nothing left. And I went to rehab, and that basically saved my life by going to rehab. I went to a place in Malibu, and I think honestly nothing that they did in rehab was any good. It was just that I was
that $40,000 place in Malibu. They're really expensive.
Yeah, but I was actually lucky because I was making a movie called Prescription Thugs about drug addiction, and I relapsed. And when I relapsed, I had already interviewed the guy that owns it, so I actually ended up being able to go there for free. The guy hooked me up.
Wow!
I used to go over there to help cook for some of the addicts. Actually, I think it's the same.
Yeah.
Talk about.
And so it was cool though. I mean, like I just needed to be away from drugs and alcohol for I ended up going for 90 days. And that's what they recommend. That's what is the most effective. But it's pretty crazy because most people can't get away for 90 days. And it was great to like get away for 90 days and like focus on myself. But the thing is that that I think, it's interesting because most people relapse even coming out of these like really expensive clinics. And I think that the number one thing in sobriety is like, you just have to want it. And if you don't want it, you'll never have it. You have to work for it and you have to want it. Otherwise it's really easy to get back into what you were doing,
That's true. That's certainly true. What happened when you left it? How did you move on to create? Well, one thing I just want to mention before we leave opioids, there's an interesting thing that's going on right now. I know you probably know about this. Esketamine has been approved for use for depression, which is a kind of ketamine. And it's very interesting, actually. Not many people know this, but have you ever been on methadone?
No, I didn't do methadone.
So methadone has two isomer forms in the methadone. They're usually a racemic mixture. One of them is called dextromethadone. Dextromethadone, one of the reasons why it's easy to keep a stable dose and not overdo it, well, other than the fact that the clinic gives it to you, is because it does something else other than agonize the opioid receptors. It antagonizes something called the NMDA glutamate receptors. When you antagonize the NMDA glutamate receptors, you can lower your tolerance to opioids. So it's one of the tools that not many people know about, but it is in methadone. Not many people know about it. Even the methadone clinics don't realize they're doing this. And ketamine, many people don't realize, is actually a mu opioid agonist. And so is tianeptine, which is the drug that's been prescribed now in Europe for depression. And I believe that the actual antidepressant effect from esketamine when they nasally use it is actually just the mu opioid receptor. Downstream to that is the dopamine, and that's what they're getting actually. But the interesting thing about esketamine or ketamine, as well as PCP, those are the NMDA blockers. One of the things that could be useful for someone who's on kratom, for example, is to take another drug to block the NMDA receptors. Like, for example, there's an Alzheimer's drug called memantine. All it does is block these receptors, but that could lower someone's tolerance or lower someone's ability to raise their tolerance over time. But anyway, I wanted you to continue your story. When you left that place, how did you get into kratom, which I know you helped popularize quite a bit in the US?
Yeah. So, I left that place and was out of rehab for a while and wasn't drinking anymore, and drinking was what I was using to sort of kill pain and go to bed at night. And I had a friend of mine who was a pro wrestler who was on like 120 opioids a day, and he had been in my films. His name's Horseshoe, and he called me up one day and he's like, "Hey, bro, you ever heard of kratom?" And I was like, "No." And he's like, "All right, I'm gonna come over and I'm gonna bring you some kratom." And he had lived in Vegas at the time, and he came to visit me and introduced me to this stuff called kratom, which I didn't really know about. I had heard about it before, but I had never actually like used it or anything. And this guy was a guy who, like I said, he was taking 120 opioids a day, and he was saying that this helped him with pain. And he was selling it too. He wasn't trying to sell it to me, but he was selling it, and he kind of wanted my approval. Like, he knows I know a lot of people, and he's like, "Hey, bro, right. Like if you get on this, a lot of people." And I was just like, okay, this is some shit he's selling, whatever. And I took it, and after I took it, I waited like 45 minutes or something like that. And then I called him back and I was like, "Dude, what did you give me? Like, whatever you gave me is awesome. Like, I feel great." And he's like, "I told you, bro," so basically that's how I first found out about it. And the guy who owned the kratom company, his name's Kelly Dunn. He owns a company called Urban Ice Organics. And I met up with him, and Kelly and I sort of talked about it for a while. And Kelly's like, "Oh, I'd like you to make a documentary about this." And I laughed at him. I'm like, "Well, I'm not going to make a documentary about some weird plant that I just found out about 2 seconds ago." Well, 3 months later, I end up calling him back saying, "Hey man, I've been using this every day for like 3 months, and it's like changing my life. Like I feel great. I can lift again." Like, before I took kratom, I hadn't touched a squat bar in, probably 10, 12 years. Sure. And so I started taking kratom, Next thing you know, I'm squatting and deadlifting again. Next thing I know, I'm pushing a sled in the gym. I'm doing all these things that I just thought I would never do again. And it just helped me immensely. It helped me stick to my diet. It helped me train. It helped me do everything. I've never had any problems with it. I know some people do, and I actually attribute that a lot to the fact that kratom is so unregulated that I don't know what people are taking.
Exactly.
We have a product called Mind Bullet that we sell, and I know exactly what that is and where it comes from. And it's just a Mangda strain of kratom. The strains don't matter that much. That's way overblown as a marketing gimmick. But the kratom that I sell and that I take, I've never had a problem with it being addictive. I've never had a problem with it, like with withdrawals, but also I take it like once a day and use it responsibly. And I think that anybody I've seen have a problem with kratom being addictive, they take way too much of it. They usually take like 10 grams of it. And that's the people I've seen get addicted to it. So I can't speak for everyone. I'm just saying I never had an issue with it, but I have seen people at high doses have issues with it.
We try to keep our podcasts a bit informative sometimes. So I did a lot of research beforehand on the pharmacology of kratom. The first thing I wanted to mention is that it's actually never been studied. The pharmacokinetics of kratom, which means how it's metabolized in the body, has never been studied in a human. So we don't actually know exactly how the different alkaloids get metabolized in the body.
Yeah.
But they have been studied in rodents, and there are some interesting things. I'm sure you're very aware of the main metabolite, which is called mitragynine.
Yep.
And then there's another one called 7-HMG. 7-HMG being mitragynine. So kratom has between 0.5 to 1.5% alkaloids. And these alkaloids actually, they say, some papers say they're more than 25, but some papers say they're more than 40. 60% of them are mitragynine, and 2% of those alkaloids is actually the 7-HMG, which is very powerful. The thing that not many people know, which I found in a paper, is that actually it's been proven now in vivo in rodents that the mitragynine is actually metabolized by rodents into 7-HMG. So there is actually probably more 7-HMG going on. For the audience that doesn't realize why this is interesting, mitragynine acts very similar to Subutex. But it's a full agonist of the mu-opioid receptor, but it's an antagonist of the kappa and the delta. Whereas, and it's not very powerful compared to morphine in terms of its efficacy at the mu-opioid receptor. But 7-HMG is only 5 times more efficacious than fentanyl at the mu-opioid receptor.
Yeah.
So it depends how you metabolize. It also may depend on your metabolism, your CYP enzymes yourself, how much you change mitragynine into the other one. But the other thing, my personal opinion, I've just tried kratom a little bit, but seeing bodybuilders, young people, especially, we have a lot of young listeners, 18-year-olds, 17, even younger, that go and take kratom and they use it for the gym and stuff. And they think it's completely harmless because it's natural. And maybe they abuse it. And then they've never used opioids before. They don't have pain. So they end up getting into an opioid addiction by accident. So I think those are usually the people that abuse it, in my opinion. Don't you agree?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that people should just know, like, if you just use it once a day, like if you use it once a day, you shouldn't have any problems with it. And like, who needs to be up more than once a day? And so I use it as like a pre-workout, where I just use it if I have pain, but I just use it once a day. I don't take it like several times a day. I don't think taking anything several times a day is a good idea,
Yeah, of course not, because it develops the habituation. Because you develop So one other thing, you have a very interesting view on CBD, which is the same view I have, which is that it's sort of, you didn't say it directly, I think, in interviews, but I feel like it's over-commercialized and over-marketed. It's not very effective. You've said that you've taken 5,000 milligrams, I think, of CBD.
Yeah, there's no proof that it does anything. There's really no proof that it does anything for pain. Any studies that do say that it does anything for pain have used over 1,000 milligrams, and that's not going to be affordable for anybody. That's going to cost you like $100 a dose. And I just haven't seen CBD do anything to help people with chronic pain, get out of chronic pain. I think there is some sort of like placebo effect that goes on. And I think that most people that use CBD that find it really effective use the salves, like the topicals. And so the topicals have like Bengay in them, stuff that's like some sort of like cream, and it has some like icy hot in it. And so people are like, oh, I rub that on and I feel great. It's like, well, you could have rubbed icy hot on or Tiger Balm and you'd feel great also.
Yeah.
But I don't think it has anything to do with the actual CBD.
To be honest, I received a gift from a client recently, which was like $7,000 of CBD because he owns a CBD company. And I never had the money, I know that the effective doses from research are like 300 milligrams or more a day, which is very expensive to continue doing. Yeah. I wanted to use it as a neuroprotective compound, which has been shown to do, because basically, just briefly for the audience, THC directly agonizes the CB1 receptor and maybe the CB2 receptor also, I don't remember. Well, but what CBD does is upregulate endocannabinoids, which are like anandamide and these kind of compounds, and lets them access those receptors more naturally. For the first time, I took a little bit of the bottle, then I drank a whole bottle, 5,000 milligrams. Then one day I tried 10,000 milligrams, which by the way had an interesting stimulatory effect. But I had absolutely no sedation or any kind of pain relief.
That's crazy, right?
And yours have THC in them, right, Leo?
Mine had, it's very.
They have to have THC in them, right? Correct?
There's a tiny amount, like 0.1.
A tiny amount, right? A lot of these companies advertise though no THC, like THC free, which is even worse.
It makes it even more worthless.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. more worthless. And I'm I crack up that companies that market that.
There's a lot of supplements out there. I mean, turmeric is one of the biggest examples of something that, if you look at Dr. Georgia Eads' work, she says that turmeric can't be absorbed by the human body. And so we're taking this stuff that we think is doing, it's like, hey, it could flavor something. You might like the taste of it or something, but
turmeric's like the new thing now.
Yeah, it's not really doing anything to lower inflammation, and they can't really show it in any studies. And when you start looking into stuff like that, you just start realizing like so many of these things that we think are useful are actually worthless. And then other things that we think are harmful, like mushrooms, for example, are, could be really good for us. I've used, I've done psilocybin mushrooms for pain and used them for pain issues, and also I think they could do a lot of help in the nutrition space. You have a lot of people who are just so addicted to food. And I feel like mushrooms help people get over addictions if they do them. If people do mushrooms, like, I'm not talking about like taking mushrooms and going to a concert, but the use of psilocybin in therapeutic ways, where you're basically just sitting in a dark room by yourself and thinking about stuff like, you know what, I'm overweight, I need to get on a diet, I need to eat right. And you go in with those focuses. I think they can do great things for people with their nutrition and great things with people with chronic pain. There's an article called The Psychedelic Science of Pain that's out of San Diego State University, where they've been using what psychedelics do is they sort of fire up parts of your brain that have never been fired up before. And that actually helps your central nervous system, kind of like heal things in the body. So I've had like a lot of pain relief using mushrooms.
So that's an interesting thing. You talked about two different things. One is the subjective experience of like a hero's dose of psilocybin mushrooms. You sit there and you have thoughts and you for life. The second thing you talked about was this firing of the brain, which I would really like to talk to you more about, because that's really what Ibogaine does. And we can talk more about that.
Yeah.
I've read almost all the literature on psychedelics affecting pain or affecting anxiety and stuff like that, as well as all the literature on Ibogaine, every single paper. And I've been using Ibogaine for a couple of years myself, on and off, just to experiment with it. The interesting thing is what's going on here is this. So one thing is the subjective experience. So you could have that with ketamine, you could have that with PCP, you could have that with DMT. A subjective experience that changes. It's like a religious experience, right?
Remember? Oh, sure. Yeah, you could use. It doesn't have to be psilocybin. It could be LSD. It could be Ibogaine. It could be any of the drugs. Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Ibogaine, I feel like, is a little bit less effective on this, but the subjective experience we're talking about. Like, I wanted to ask you about AA later, because I know that you have some opinions on AA also, and basically the idea is that AA was built around like a couple of concepts. One of them was Carl Jung's view that a religious experience is the only thing that can stop an alcoholic from continuing to drink. And so I feel like these psychedelics sometimes give people something close to a religious experience. That's a subjective experience that can change.
Yeah.
The second thing, though, is that, for example, you're talking about LSD and mushrooms, psilocybin. Both of those compounds agonize two receptors that are very important for what's called neurogenesis. That's 5-HT2C and I think A. Well, anyway, they're 5-HT2 serotonin receptors. These are the same receptors that SSRIs work on over like 6 months to increase neurotrophic factors in the brain. The advantage of ibogaine, actually, other than, of course, blocking the opioid receptors, the real advantage of ibogaine is that it very quickly, and this was only discovered a couple of years ago, it really quickly upregulates something called pro-BDNF, pro-brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is one of the growth factors of the brain. And it keeps this upregulated for about 2 weeks. It does another thing also, though, which I know you talked about on your interview with Dave Palumbo, which is it inhibits dopaminergic activity for a couple of weeks. So you didn't want to dip right afterwards because your dopamine was blocked. You weren't getting anything out of the dip. Now, by the way, you don't need ibogaine to inhibit that at all. You can do it in many other ways. And ibogaine is not the most effective way to increase neurotrophic factors in the brain. Actually, it's very effective for a one-shot thing if you do a flood dose. But there are many other compounds. I mean, you can get bovine neurotrophic factors, that means cow neurotrophic factors, and inject them intramuscularly. And you'll find that in 2 weeks, you'll have a better result than you had from ibogaine, and it will stay because you'll continue injecting it. Or you could use SSRIs, but some people don't like SSRIs because of sexual dysfunction and so on. But like, you know, I think there's a lot of potential there. And I think that some of these, the ibogaine in particular it's really useful for opioid addicts that need to get off the opioids, but it's not this reset idea, and this kind of stuff depends on neurogenesis. And you have to have a long-term plan for that, because basically in childhood, our brains are really plastic. That means they can adapt to our environment very quickly because we have growth factors in our brain all across the brain in childhood. But in adulthood, we only have them in 2 places of the brain, one called the subventricular zone and one called the subglandular zone. One is the hippocampus. But the rate of growth of new neurons, which are the basic cells of the brain, is slow. So it actually increases when you do drugs. So when you do drugs, your brain is really plastic. It's adapting to doing drugs. And then when you stop, like you go to AA, you go totally sober, your brain is really rigid and it's stuck on what it was doing before. So one of the elements is really increasing this plasticity of the brain, you know, which I think you experience. How was your personal experience using ibogaine?
My personal experience was great. I mean, I actually did ibogaine, not because I was addicted to anything or was trying to really quit anything. There were some things I wanted to quit, but mainly I did it for chronic pain. So I was told that it would help me with chronic pain, and I didn't think it would work for that at all. But basically, like everything that was in pain when I came out of the ibogaine experience wasn't in pain anymore. And that lasted for a good, I want to say it lasted for a good 6 months. But then after about 6 months, I started getting in pain again. But a lot of that was my fault, because the reason I got in pain again was because I was lifting really heavy again. Like I went back to doing what I was doing, right? And that's the same as an addict, going back and doing the drug that got you there, you know? So I went back into like my heavy lifting and everything and got in pain again. Then I did ibogaine again for a second time. And that's helped me a lot again, you know, doing it the second time. Not as much as the first time. I don't know why. I think maybe the second time was just I don't know, who knows why, but yeah, so that helped me a lot again. And so, yeah, I really think, you know, what it did for me was like a miracle, because the amount of pain I was in, it was like, I wouldn't even want to get up off the couch. And now I just pop up off the couch, you know, every day for 6 months after
is that your hips that are bothering you that much?
It was everything. Like I just had pain everywhere. I had arthritis, you know, like arthritis is kind of everywhere. So all your joints ache, and you just like, you don't want to get up off the couch because you're like, I know how this is going to feel. It's going to feel like shit.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so then it just kind of keeps you sitting on the couch, you know?
Yeah. So a couple of comments there, just going back a little bit, we talked about turmeric and how it's very poorly absorbed by humans. It's poorly absorbed actually because it's a toxin to us. So we don't want to absorb it. And there are these brands like Thera-curcumin, which are better absorbed. And unfortunately, even some of the best Alzheimer's prevention clinics in the US, their main tool is turmeric. I use turmeric, but I don't rely on it much. There are other supplements that dramatically reduce my C-reactive protein. C-reactive protein being a protein released by the liver when you're in a state of systemic inflammation, which is when your joints will start hurting. So, for example, just to put in perspective, I mean, I don't have arthritis myself. I mean, I do get joint pain actually, but I don't have arthritis. But what I have is something called Crohn's disease, which is the most severe GI autoimmune disease.
Yeah.
And for about a year, I was in crippling pain. I couldn't even sit down for 8 months, and really, really severe. I had something called fistulizing Crohn's disease, which is a very severe precancerous kind. And I've been able to, with my diet and supplements, reduce my C-reactive protein completely. I don't have any symptoms of Crohn's disease, and mainly due to the supplements and stuff like that, reducing my inflammation. And I keep tabs on it with my blood work, but I can only tell with my joints aching. So I think that maybe there are some other supplements at very high doses that you may notice will lower your inflammation enough. The other thing that you're talking about is ibogaine. What I've noticed about people who use ibogaine that are not getting off opiates is that they keep using ibogaine, and they use it frequently. And often some of these people, they go back to doing drugs and then go back to ibogaine, then go back to use, and then back and forth. But the reason why is that neurogenesis in studies in rodents lasts only about a month. It doesn't continue. The problem with ibogaine is it raises your heart rate so much that it can easily cause an arrhythmia, which is why I was very upset about Lenny doing ibogaine, which I had asked people not to do to him because he has a not fully functioning heart and he could have easily died. And he also has liver disease, and that's why he was bleeding. He could have died easily. And so ibogaine is a very dangerous drug, and it's not the only, unless you're an opiate addict, there's so many other ways to increase neurogenesis and stuff like that. I also wanted to ask you, so what are your your views on abstinence, full abstinence with AA for addicts? Does it work for everyone? Why does it work for some people and not others?
Well, I think that full abstinence isn't it's no way to live your life. You go from being like a full-on like drug addict, right, to having nothing. And I've just seen so many people operate completely fine, using, it depends. So it also depends on the person, right? Why is the person doing drugs? If it's because of stress and things like that, and people they quit everything, I don't know. I think that I was away from drugs and alcohol for long enough that getting back into like doing some mushrooms and using some THC here and there, like those things, and they were for different reasons. They were for like pain relief and stuff like that. But also those things are fun, and they relieve stress and things like that. So I just think that when you have like total abstinence, then it tends to be too hard. And again, it's not sustainable. It's like going on an all meat diet, And so to tell somebody, like if I tell Nick, okay, you use opioids, but you're a bad person if you smoke marijuana, like I don't think that's necessarily the best thing for him. I think the best thing is like let that person have a choice of whether they want to do it or not. Now, if drugs affect people too much and like, dude, I can't do anything because like I just know I'm a maniac and I'll smoke pot every day. And I'll say, well, then don't do it. But I think it should be up to the person. I don't think it should be up to us to judge people. Like I'd say if you're in AA and you're not drinking and you're not taking opioids, you're not taking what killed you, then you should still be able to go back to it. But even when I was taking kratom, people in AA were really mad at me. Like people went nuts. I went on Joe Rogan's podcast and talked about kratom, and I had all these people bombarding me with like the fact that I'm not sober. And I'm like, yeah, but I don't think like, why do I need to be sober? Kratom doesn't kill you. Why do I need to be sober? Like, it doesn't make any sense, And that's the way I look at it. Like if something is not what was killing you, don't worry about it, but also be very mindful of what you're doing all the time. And if it's just about being honest with yourself, I guess it boils down to.
Can I ask you a question real quick? If it wasn't for your injuries, do you think you would have been addicted to pills?
No, never. There would be no reson to get addicted.
So you weren't into doing anything, party drugs or anything like ecstasy or coke?
No, I never did. It's funny because none of the things I did were like the illegal drugs. It was always like, prescription drugs were like, those are the things that I would take.
So it was the injury that took you down then.
Yeah. Before that it was only like drinking, before that I didn't even smoke pot. Like before I touched opioids or anything.
Wow.
Yeah. The only thing I ever touched was alcohol before that.
How old were you when that opiate addiction started?
35.
Yeah, like 35 when I had my hip replaced.
And then how long did that continue for?
Probably like 7 years.
Oh, wow. Shit.
Kind of a long time.
Okay. Yeah, I went from drug to drug to drug. Like my addiction was just one thing to another, but I was in the party scene. That was my problem. And then injuries on top of it just made it worse. So
yeah, the thing is, I never really even had any fun on the drugs. You know, like at least you got the party. Like I didn't have any fun. I was just taking them. Like
you're just sitting there
at home. Yeah, it wasn't that much.
Were you snorting the pills or swallowing?
Just swallowing them. I was always scared of that stuff. Like I was always scared of like real drugs. And I think that's another reason why I sort of kept going, is because I felt like I was on these, these cheap drugs like that, like fake,
No, I understand.
They can't hurt you because a doctor gave them to you, kind of thing. You know?
Did you realize what an animal those were before?
Oh
you
yeah.
Or
no. Not
you didn't realize how bad.
After. No, you realize afterwards, you know.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I was just curious.
But before I continue on AA, I wanted to ask you something. Have you noticed that, I've noticed this personally, that opiate addiction sometimes changes a person's personality more than any other addiction, usually when they use heroin. It turns people, even when they get sober, sometimes they stay selfish. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, I don't know too many people that have been on heroin. You know, I do know a lot of people have opioid problems. You know, it depends on the recovery of the person. You know, whether they stay selfish or not. I've had a lot of addicts that recover from alcohol, even, and they're just still the same person. We call them dry drunks. Exactly. I mean, there's a term for that, and there's a term for it because people still act the same until somebody completely changes, you know, their persona, basically their personality. They're never going to change how they are towards other people. And like one of the things that I think really helps with that is stuff like mushrooms and LSD. And those things actually a lot of times have people have these awakenings where it kills their ego. And by killing their ego, it sort of like gets them over that hump. So I think that I think that AA could do very well with a little bit of mushrooms, you know. So I think that would actually help these people that are having that sort of issue of not being able to be honest with themselves.
So, you know, AA is based over like religious principles and then involving yourself in a community that can support you and so on. But there are people, you know, and they call them in AA, I think they call them like dual diagnosis or something like that, where they have a mental issue as well as an addiction. I think most people that end up with an addiction, unless except yourself, people who have pain, it's a different issue. But many people, like myself, have brains that are, deficient in some form. Like, for example, personally, I was deficient, I think, in serotonin from youth, maybe from experiences I had.
Yeah.
And if you go, like in AA, for example, they will tell you can't use an SSRI. In some AA groups, like the one that wear the suits, I don't know what they're called, though, that group. But anyway, some of them will tell you can't even use it as that's a drug. And so the way I think of it is like we have cognitive architectures. And if there's something we can do to improve, without getting high, to improve the way we view the world, then we should use all the tools at our resources, you know?
Yeah.
Don't you think so? And I think that's what.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, other things that aren't addictive, that's why I said I don't even mind if people use marijuana because it's not addictive, but is it ruining your life? Like, I think that's the central question of addiction. Like, is something actually affecting your life? And if it's not affecting your life, then I think you go ahead and use it, you know?
I know you've stayed a long time with us and I'm sure you're very busy. The two last things I wanted to ask you about. So I know you quit dip. I just wanted to mention to you, I used to smoke cigarettes for a long time and I quit actually. I restarted using tobacco, which is this kind of tobacco. It's called snus from Sweden.
Yeah.
Have you heard of it before?
Yeah. So that's not just nicotine, though. That's actually tobacco.
Yes, tobacco. But there are nicotine pouches as well, but those unfortunately release the nicotine really quickly, which I don't find. The interesting thing about this is dip is usually fermented, and it's fermented with molasses and with other sugars. And what happens is the sugars mix with the nitrogen-related compounds in it. There's similar things to why bacon is cancerous or processed foods are cancerous. And that's the reason why, for example, if you swallow some juice, when you first start with dip, your stomach will really bother you. If you use snus and swallow some of the juice, your stomach will not bother you because it's not fermented in the same way. It's actually much safer. So the advent of snus, well, Snus was always in Sweden, but in the 1970s, they started packaging it in portions so you can put it in your lip. And since then, Sweden has had the lowest cancer rates, I think, in Europe for lung cancer. The only thing it's only been associated with, and in only like one study, is pancreatic cancer. But pancreatic cancer is something that really gets raised when people have higher adrenaline.
Yeah.
What many people don't know about nicotine, and they claim that it's a bad drug. Nicotine, look at this. Smokers are about 70% less likely to get Parkinson's disease. 70%. It's a major neuroprotective compound.
Yeah.
People don't realize that. I mean, for example, when people get Alzheimer's disease, the first medication they give them is donepezil. Donepezil is a medication that inhibits the breakdown of a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine, which is very important for memory. Nicotine replaces acetylcholine in the brain. So it's very neuroprotective. Many people don't know that. So I just wanted to mention that to you in case you ever go back to dip. This stuff is better, and you can get this in what's called lost form. So it's just like dip, and there's no portion. You put it in your mouth.
Yeah.
It tastes totally different. It's you can tell it's not irritating you like that. It's wonderful.
I really like it. You got me on it now.
No, I got you on snuff. That's nasal.
Oh, that's right. You got me on snuff.
Yeah. Nick, the one I sent you is horrible. I tried the flavored ones. They're horrible. I ordered the non-flavored ones again. I'll send you.
I don't mind it. I don't mind it.
Oh no, the other one's awesome. It's just.
Oh really?
That's nasal snuff, what we're talking about, which is what they used to do in Europe in the 1600s. You know, they used to put a little bit of tobacco in their nose.
Yeah, I can't do that.
I do it in the morning only. It's really good to get yourself going in the morning, but the other stuff is fantastic. But thank you so much, Chris, for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Oh yeah, no problem, man. Anytime, guys.
Chris, appreciate it a lot.
The last thing I wanted to say, just maybe it's helpful a little bit. The way I approached solving my own issues with my brain was threefold. The first was to reduce inflammation in the nervous system. I don't know if you know this, but if you take inflammatory cytokine, like the ones our body produces to attack our joints, like tumor necrosis factor alpha, if you inject it in a rodent, the rodent will become depressed. The rodent will become anxious. So just inflammation in the brain will cause that. So there are ways to reduce that. The second way is to increase neurogenesis and neuroplasticity, which is what ibogaine does and psilocybin does. But you can do it in ways that don't make you high at all. Like cerebrolysin is something you can order from Russia and inject it into your muscles, and you will have that plasticity. And the third way is, of course, by affecting neurotransmitters. But I think in the opioid case, I don't know how to do that without kratom. Really, kratom may be one of the best options.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. But anyway, thank you so much, Chris, for joining us.
All right. Thank you, guys. Take care.